Snow fell like a slow, disinterested curtain, drifting down over the valley where men were dying. The first bullets had come in with no warning, just a bright, impossible spark in the snow on the opposite ridge, then the delayed, buzzing crack as rounds chewed through the bank above the lead vehicle. Now the small platoon sat trapped in a narrow white throat of terrain. The world around them turned into a blender of ice and noise. "Contact front! Contact front!" someone shouted, though the obvious hardly needed announcing. Private Hadi lay half-buried behind the engine block of the lead truck, fingers numb through his gloves as he tried to jam a fresh belt into the machine gun. The barrel steamed faintly in the cold. Every time he tried to raise the weapon high enough to answer the fire raining down from above, the tripod snagged in the churned snow. "They're too high," he yelled, more to the air than to anyone specific. "I can't get the angle." Behind him, the valley rose sheer, a wall of dirty white rock and ice. In front of him, the road curved between banks that might as well have been the inside of a rifle barrel. Rounds smacked into the hood with a sound like hammers on thick metal. Shards of paint and frost sprayed his face. "Keep that gun talking," the platoon leader shouted. Lieutenant Kareem was somewhere off to Hadi's left, taking what passed for cover behind a half-buried boulder. His breath plumed in short, controlled bursts. Snow dusted his helmet, renewed faster than he could brush it away. An explosion clawed at the air, closer this time, a mortar round punching a geyser from the slope above and pelting them with rock fragments and compacted snow. "Down, down," someone screamed. The second truck had tried to reverse, its tires spinning uselessly. Now it sat at an awkward angle, nose jammed into the bank, rear wheels half lifted, like a panicked animal trying to leap free and failing. A third vehicle farther back blocked any hope of retreat. They were stuck. The enemy knew it. On the ridgeline above, dark shapes moved among white rocks. The breach they'd blown through the crown of the ridge looked like a cracked tooth, fresh scars of blasted stone framing it. From that gap, fighters flowed out into pre-marked scrapes in the snow, settling in with practiced efficiency. The amount of fire they brought was obscene for such a quiet piece of map. Hadi finally forced the belt in and slapped the cover down. "Up!" he shouted, and heaved the gun as high as he could. The muzzle climbed, dug into a drift, climbed again. He squeezed the trigger. The machine gun chattered. Tracer climbed the slope, fell short, climbed again, stitching the rock wall below the enemy line but not quite reaching the men above. "More! Keep them down!" Kareem bellowed. "Sir, I can't." Rounds walked toward Hadi in a tight line, decades of refined technique encoded in the pattern. He threw himself sideways, rolling into a rut where the truck's tire had dug through earlier that morning. Bullets ripped through the space he'd just occupied, shredding a sandbag and punching through the thin metal of the wheel rim. "Medic!" A voice howled from behind. Kareem risked a glance back. The third truck's driver was sprawled in the snow, clutching at his leg, blood already turning the white into a too bright red. The platoon's medic, Farouk, skidded across the ice toward him on his knees, pack banging against his back. Another mortar fell, this one closer, too close. It came in with that horrible, hollow whistle, the one that sent your muscles locking before your brain caught up. It landed between the second and third trucks. The explosion flipped a soldier into the air like a toy. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. Shards of metal and ice whirled, pinging off helmets and hulls. "Farouk!" Kareem shouted. "I'm good." The medic's reply was thin, breathless. He huddled over the driver now, hands working fast, snow stained beneath them. "He's not." Kareem pressed the radio close to his ear, willing it to work. All he got was static. The noise crawled into his skull, a whole different kind of assault. "Sunrise, this is Stone to 1. Troops in contact, he barked. "Grid." He paused to glance at the GPS clipped to his vest. "Grid 3-5, repeat, 3-5, valley east of the outpost. We are pinned, require immediate." The static thickened, swallowing his words. For a second, he thought it was just the echo of the explosion. Corporal Bashir slid into the scrape beside him, breathing hard. "Sir, hire's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean it's dead," Bashir snapped, tapping his own radio. "Command net, fire support channel, even the backup handset in the truck." All static. Sat Link 2. His mouth twisted. They're jamming us. Gotta be. Kareem stared at him. Jamming here meant someone had really done their homework. This valley wasn't on any usual route, just a maintenance run between the village and the upper outpost. How would they even know we're? He broke off as another burst of fire stitched across the front of the first truck, forcing them both flat. Above them, the enemy machine gun had found its stride. Dug into a well-sighted nest. It spat orange tongues, rhythm steady. Each belt-fed burst carving lines in the snow closer and closer to the vehicles. Whoever was on the trigger knew what they were doing. Short, controlled bursts, letting the barrel cool barely enough to keep from cooking the weapon. Somewhere near that gun, an unseen spotter must have been adjusting fire, small corrections tightening the noose. The pattern of impacts changed, less random now, more like deliberate hands rearranging pieces. Spread out, Kareem shouted, waving an arm. Use the rocks, don't clump by the trucks. Some obeyed, scrambling toward what little cover the valley offered. Others stayed pressed to metal, as if the vehicles were anchors in a sea that could sweep them away if they let go. Another mortar crashed home. Shrapnel sang. Kareem's heart hammered against his ribs. He checked his watch out of habit, as if time might bend if he glared at it hard enough. 9 minutes since the first contact. 9 minutes for an ambush to turn a routine resupply into a slow execution. No fire support. No overhead drones. No higher command. No help coming. Sir, Bashir's voice was strangely calm now. We don't break this. We're done in 5. Kareem knew he was right. Either the enemy would walk mortars onto them, one by one, or storm down the slope under covering fire and finish things up close. They had the numbers, the height, the initiative. He looked up the valley again at the breach in the ridge. He'd passed that spot 100 times and never noticed the weakness in the rock. Now it yawned open like a wound, full of muzzle flashes. Another burst from the machine gun ripped into the snow a meter from Farouk and the wounded driver, showering them with powdered ice. Leave him, someone shouted. Get back. Farouk ignored them. Hands steady, he tightened a tourniquet, his face pale behind his fogged goggles. The driver moaned, then fell silent. Everything narrowed for a moment. The roar of the gun, the hiss of the radios, the distant thump of mortars. Then, for no reason he could explain, Kareem's world went quiet. It wasn't that the battle stopped. The gunfire was still there, the explosions, the shouts. But something in the rhythm shifted. The ridgeline, for a fraction of a heartbeat, felt like it was holding its breath. He saw a figure on the crest step up, silhouetted for an instant against the white sky. Thick jacket, scarf, an arm raised, gesturing to someone just out of view, some kind of commander from the way the others reacted to him. Kareem blinked. A single, distant rifle crack sliced through the layered noise, clean and sharp and wrong. It came from somewhere behind the ridge, not from the line currently shredding the valley. The man on the crest jerked as if yanked by a wire. His head snapped back, then his whole body folded, legs buckling. For a surreal moment, he hung there against the sky, balanced on his heels. Then he toppled forward and tumbled down the slope, carving a new trail in the snow. The effect was instant. The machine gun faltered mid-burst. Fire from several other positions stuttered, then shifted into ragged, confused sprays. Fighters looked around, ducking lower, unsure what had just happened. What the? Bashir murmured. Before Kareem could answer, the second shot came. Another distant crack, same impossible direction. On the ridge, the heavy weapon's assistant gunner lurched sideways, clutching at his neck. The gunner reached for him, instinctive, and exposed himself. A heartbeat later, he sprawled across the weapon, limp. The big gun fell silent. Its barrel slid out of the nest and dropped into the snow, steam leaking from the muzzle as if even the steel were relieved. For a second, nobody moved. Who's shooting? Hadi shouted from the front, voice half panicked, half hopeful. The enemy tried to adjust. A few switched abruptly to firing down toward the rear of the ridge, their rounds disappearing into empty sky. Others shouted in confusion, their language carried thinly on the cold air. Without the steady pulses of the machine gun and the clear direction of a leader, their fire fractured. Gaps appeared where there'd been a wall. Kareem didn't fully understand what he was seeing, but his body knew what to do with a chance when it showed up. Now, he yelled, throat raw. Push. Move up the right side. Rafi, get that gun forward. Hadi surged to his knees, dragging the machine gun toward a better angle, the weight of it forgotten for the moment. Two other soldiers rose from behind the trucks and sprinted to new positions, feet slipping on ice. Rounds were still coming down, but fewer now, wilder. The mortar fire, too, had hesitated. Whoever had been directing it was either dead or suddenly unsure. Sir, Bashir panted as they bounded forward. Where did that come from? Kareem risked another glance up and past the ridge to the distant, blinding slopes beyond. The sun bounced off untouched snowfields, erasing detail, turning everything into white glare and hard shadow. There was nothing up there. No friendly overwatch, no known position. Just rock and snow and the distant line of the border. Behind them, Kareem said slowly, mind racing. It had to be behind them. High and off angle. He shook his head. We don't have anyone there. Apparently we do, Bashir muttered. They pushed, using every second the enemy hesitated. Hadi got the machine gun onto a slightly higher rock and finally managed to rake the lower parts of the ridge, sending the fighters scrambling deeper into their scrapes. Kareem didn't know if they were about to win this fight or if the enemy would regroup and crush them anyway. He only knew that whoever had just reached into the battle from beyond the ridge had bought them breathing room. As he shouted new orders somewhere far away, detached from the valley, the scene shifted. Snow filled the frame again, but now it was quiet, thick flakes falling onto a different stretch of mountain. A gloved hand rested on the worn stock of a long rifle, leather creaking softly as fingers flexed. On one of those fingers, a simple gold wedding band caught a stray shard of pale sunlight. The hand did not tremble. It rested, relaxed but ready. The rifle settled into a nest of rocks on some unseen height behind a ridge. Whoever lay behind that weapon had just broken a battle that was never supposed to be theirs. This was no miracle and no accident. It was a choice made by someone who'd sworn never to do this again. Someone who, on another slope not far from the valley, was supposed to be trading vows instead of shots. Earlier that same day, the mountain had looked like the kind of place war had finally forgotten. The village sat tucked into the hollow between ridges, stone houses piled, as if someone had tipped a crate of bricks and left them where they fell. Smoke rose in lazy lines from chimneys, dissolving slowly into the clear blue. Snow softened the hard edges of everything. Roofs, walls, the rough track that wound up toward the outpost. Bright strips of cloth fluttered from wires strung between houses, homemade decorations twisting and untwisting in the breeze. They'd swept the square early, shovels scraping stone as soldiers and villagers cleared a space for folding chairs and a simple arch made of evergreen branches. Children had stamped patterns into the snowbanks, their laughter bouncing off the walls. For once, the music in the air wasn't from someone's radio in a barracks room, but live, an old man drawing notes out of a stringed instrument, hands moving with the easy memory of decades. Inside a narrow house, set slightly apart from the square, a woman stood before a cracked mirror. Nadia pulled in a slow breath and adjusted the fall of white fabric over her shoulders. The dress wasn't much, simple, long sleeves, the skirt cut loose enough to hide the thermal pants she wore underneath. A borrowed shawl, soft with age, wrapped snug around her shoulders, hiding the faint outline of the body armor plates beneath. She tugged the hem up and checked her boots. Black, scuffed, military issue, soles worn smooth in places. They'd buffed them as best they could that morning, but mud and rock had left their stories on the leather. They felt more honest than the shoes someone had suggested she wear for the ceremony. Still standing like you expect, incoming, a voice said from the doorway. She looked over. Sergeant Rafi leaned on the frame, arms crossed, collar of his jacket open despite the cold. Snowflakes melted on his cropped hair and slid down his temple. Feet planted, weight forward, he continued, tilting his head. You're not supposed to look like you're about to charge a door, you know. Nadia's mouth tugged into a faint smile. Maybe I'm charging a different kind of door. He stepped inside, careful not to brush against the hanging dress. "You look good." "I look like someone else," she said. "Maybe that's the point." He stopped behind her, both of them watching her reflection for a moment. The woman in the mirror looked almost peaceful, dark hair braided and pinned up. The tiny scar along her cheek, just below the left eye, faded but still there. I was not quite able to let go of the habit of scanning every corner of the room. Rafi's gaze dropped to her hands. "He give it to you yet?" he asked. She lifted her fingers slightly, the gold band catching light. "Last week. Early. Said he didn't want to risk the courier losing it on the way up the mountain." "That sounds like him." She could hear the affection behind the dry tone. "Are you ready?" he asked, and something in his voice had nothing to do with the ceremony. Nadia pretended not to hear the second question, hiding under the first. "As ready as I'm going to be," she said. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, lighter, more hurried. The door opened a little wider, and Aaron leaned in. He was still in uniform trousers and boots, but someone had bullied him into a freshly pressed shirt and a plain dark jacket, collar stiff, hair tamed. The rank tabs at his shoulders looked almost out of place among the borrowed finery. His face softened when he saw her. The tension he'd been carrying for weeks, the kind that came from juggling schedules and supply issues and border reports, eased just a fraction. "You're supposed to be downstairs," Rafi said, pretending to be calm. "I am calm." Aaron stepped fully into the room. "Mostly." He walked up beside Nadia, and Rafi stepped back, letting the two of them occupy the space in front of the mirror. "This okay?" Aaron asked her, eyes flicking from dress to shawl to boots, the smallest hint of worry in his expression, not about appearances, but about whether this was truly what she wanted. "It's more than I ever thought I'd have up here," she said. He reached up and adjusted a stray bit of her hair, fingers careful. "You still walking like you're on patrol?" he murmured. "Rafi already told me," she said. "Twice." "He's not wrong." Aaron's smile widened. "But it suits you." She looked at him in the mirror. "I don't want to stand under that arch and look like a soldier." "You don't," he said. "You look like you. That's all I ever wanted." He meant it. She could see that, feel it in the way his hand settled, warm and solid, at the small of her back. "Besides," he added, "you're done with rifles. Today is about peace." The words drifted in the air between them, soft and heavy at the same time. Her gaze slid, unbidden, to the shelf beside the mirror. A single framed photograph leaned there, the glass spiderwebbed at one corner where someone had dropped it years ago. Four figures stood in the picture, backs against a mud brick wall, rifles slung, helmets under their arms. Younger versions of themselves, eyes too tired for their age. Nadia was there, second from the left, scope cap flipped open, hand resting on the stock of a long rifle. The person beside her, her spotter, had their face half obscured by a thumbprint smear and a brown scorch that had eaten away the right edge of the image. The damage wasn't accidental. Beneath the photograph, a ribbon of black tape held the frame together. Nadia looked away. "Hey," Aaron said gently. "You know you don't have to put that away for today. It's part of you. They're part of you. They're part of why I said yes to this," she answered quietly. "And why I said I'm done." Rafi cleared his throat. On that cheery note, he said, "The commander will be annoyed if we keep the entire village waiting." Aaron chuckled. "Can't have that. He might demote me before the vows." "Too late," Rafi said. "The old man liked her more than you anyway." Nadia smiled properly this time. "He only likes me because I keep my mouth shut in meetings." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I remember from the last patrol debrief." She shrugged, unrepentant. "You were wrong about the terrain." He laughed, and the memory of that argument, about whether a certain ridge hid a blind approach, tugged at her, vague unease under the humor. "Today," he said, taking her hand, "no ridges, no sectors, no grids. Just you, me, and too many people watching. And cake, reportedly," Rafi added, "which is the only reason I'm here." Nadia let them pull her toward the door. Up at the outpost, the mood was different. The base clung to the mountain above the village like a second, harsher settlement. Concrete and steel, sandbags stacked against low walls, antenna masts reaching up like stripped trees. Inside the operations room, Glowing screens threw pale light on tired faces. Radios hissed and crackled, chatter low but constant as personnel checked in, confirmed routine patrols, talked about weather. At one console, a young radar operator squinted at his display. For a second, the line of green across the top flickered. A faint spike jumped, here and gone before he could blink. He frowned, tapped the side of the monitor, and watched as the line settled back into its usual sleepy pulse. Probably the weather, he muttered. The ridge often played games with signals when the wind shifted. He logged the blip anyway, fingers moving automatically across the keyboard, then leaned back in his chair. Anything? His supervisor asked from across the room. Just the usual ghosts, the operator replied. Down the slope, the ghosts had different faces. Soldiers mixed with villagers in the square, uniforms and civilian coats blurring in a patchwork crowd. Some had their rifles slung over their shoulders, magazines checked and rechecked out of habit more than real expectation. For once, the outpost had been given explicit permission to relax. Intel reports had been quiet. Patrols in the last month hadn't encountered more than distant tracks. A rare order had come down. Full ceremony allowed. No staggered attendance. No rotating security at the expense of participation. Someone, somewhere was confident. Nadia stood at the edge of the square for a moment before stepping into it, letting her eyes live one last time in the old pattern. Ridges first. Always. The mountains rose in a jagged crescent around the village. Ridge lines stacked behind ridge lines in the bright winter light. She knew them all intimately. The long, gentle slope to the east that funneled wind. The broken spine to the north where patrols often took shelter during storms. The saddle above the main pass. Her gaze snagged on that saddle. It lay slightly above and to the right of the outpost, a notch between two humps of rock, the snow there wind-scoured thinner than the rest. From there you could see down into the valley that ran behind the ridge and also over the outpost itself. No one was up there today. No observation post. No antenna. She felt it in her chest like a small, wrong note. Aaron came up beside her, following her line of sight. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't what?" she asked, though she knew. "Don't start mapping fields of fire." He bumped her shoulder with his. "Intel says no movement for weeks. Patrol came back yesterday clean. Hire gave us the rare, shiny green light." He spread his hands. "We take it. That saddle's blind from the outpost," she said. "If someone wanted to—" "Nadia." His voice hadn't changed, still gentle, but there was a thread of pleading in it now. She drew a breath and let it out, forcing her shoulders to settle. "Fine," she said. "No ridges today." He smiled, relieved. "Thank you. Now come on. If we're late, Rafi will eat all the pastries before the ceremony even starts." She let him lead her toward the arch, where the old commander waited in his full uniform, chest full of pins that had seen too many winters. As they passed, the commander leaned slightly toward Aaron, his voice low enough that only the couple could hear. "Once this is done," he said, "you still have a job. Remember what's in that bunker." "I know, sir," Aaron replied. "The drone control systems are the crown jewels up here," the commander continued. "Those drives don't fall into anyone's hands. Not for a broadcast, not for ransom, not for anything." Even today, Nadia hadn't meant to listen, but the words found her anyway. Crown jewels. Not for a broadcast. She glanced up the slope. The bunker doors were visible even from the square. Thick metal, recessed into the rock below the outpost's main building. The concrete around them was scarred from earlier winters. Nothing like the fresh hole she would see later on the ridge. "Sir," Aaron said carefully, "you assured me we had coverage." "We have what we have," the commander said, eyes narrowing. "And today we pretend we're not soldiers for 15 minutes. But if something goes wrong—" His gaze flicked briefly to Nadia. "I know who we have." She looked away, jaw tight. "Understood," Aaron said. The commander's face softened. "You both deserve today," he said gruffly. "Let's not spend it talking about worse cases." They took their places under the arch. Children wriggled in seats, parents hushed them. Soldiers shifted their weight, some uncomfortable in borrowed jackets, others still in full kit. The bells on the small stone church clanged as they tested the rope, loud and off-key, but enthusiastically rung. The sound rolled up the slope and bounced back off the upper ridge. Under the bells, Nadia felt another sound, almost hidden, a faint thud distant, as if someone had dropped something heavy far away. She flinched. Her body remembered the signature of a mortar impact better than it remembered any of the songs played in the square. "Hey," Erin murmured, squeezing her hand. "It's just the bells." "Sure," she said, forcing a smile to match his. The village elder began the rehearsal blessing, words slow and blessedly familiar. Nadia fixed her eyes on his face and tried to keep them from drifting up to the mountains. The old scars inside her thrummed like taut wires. Behind her, someone whispered, not quietly enough, "Look at her. Used to carry a rifle bigger than she was, and now." "Poetic," another answered. "Best shot we had turns in her scope for a ring." "Officer and former sniper," a third voice said. "Good symbol. Means maybe we're done with the days when every young one has to grow up behind a gun." Nadia heard every word, each one sliding over her skin. They meant well. They spoke out of hope. And they had no idea that you didn't just walk away and leave your trigger finger behind. She smiled when she was supposed to. She repeated the words she was supposed to. She let Erin's thumb trace slow circles on the back of her hand. In her mind, the flicker on the radar, the wrong note of that saddle, and the faint, muffled thud tangled into a knot she could not loosen. High above them, on a ridge that had never appeared in any planning slide as a likely problem, a man in white camouflage set down a compact antenna case and checked his watch. "It's almost time," he said to the fighters around him. They crouched in scooped-out positions behind the crest, faces wrapped, rifles resting across their knees. Their eyes were fixed on the village below. Even from here, they could see the bright scrap of cloth that marked the wedding arch. "Remember," the man with the antenna said, "we do not start until the signal. The first shell's on the bunker, not on the people." "And the jam?" one of the others asked. He tapped the case. "We test it. We wait. When they are blind, we take what we came for. And if they resist..." He looked at the village again. "They always resist," he said. "That's why the cameras will be watching." The breeze tugged at the decorations in the square. The bells rang again, louder this time. Down below, Nadia's heartbeat climbed in time with the sound. She told herself it was just nerves. She told herself she was done with rifles. The mountain, patient and indifferent, waited to prove her wrong. When the first shell fell, most of the people in the square thought it was thunder. The sky was bright, empty of clouds. The sound rolled over the valley anyway, a low, unnatural growl that made glasses rattle on tables and a few of the older villagers look up, frowning. Then came the impact. The slope above the outpost erupted, a gout of snow and shattered rock blasting outward in a white-brown bloom. The boom hit them an instant later, a slap of air that made the decorations snap and sent a flurry of powder drifting down from roofs. Silence followed, heavy and uncertain. Conversations died mid-sentence. The instrument player's hand hung above the strings, frozen. "Training," someone whispered, hopeful. "Not scheduled," another answered, voice sharp. Nadia knew immediately. "That's not a test," she murmured. Before anyone could process it, the second shell came in. This one struck lower, walking down toward the bunker entrance. The explosion was tighter, more precise. Snow, concrete, and metal fragments sprayed in a neat radius. The third landed almost exactly where it needed to. The doors shuddered but held. The ground around them did not. "Everybody inside," Erin shouted before the dust settled. "Move, move." The square exploded into motion. Villagers surged toward the church and the nearest stone buildings. Soldiers lunged for the stack of rifles, hands remembering drills even as minds scrambled to catch up. A lieutenant near the edge of the square grabbed his radio, pressing it hard to his ear. "Outpost, this is village base. We got incoming on your..." The rest of his sentence dissolved into static. He hit the side of the handset. "Say again," he snapped. Nothing. The static thickened, hissing like an angry snake. In the operations room at the outpost, lights flickered. The radio rack erupted in overlapping bursts of noise. "Higher link just dropped," someone shouted. "Check the backup," the supervisor snapped. Already switched. It's all the same. I'm not hearing anything past the ridge. On another console, the radar operator watched his screen glitch, the line across the top dissolving into jagged spikes before flattening out entirely. That's not weather, he said, throat dry. Down in the square, the lieutenant's eyes widened. He tried a different channel. Gun line, this is... Static answered him, unbroken. Comms are dead, he yelled. Above them, the mountain woke fully. From the freshly blasted breach in the upper ridge, figures poured out, not scattered and tentative, but organized, moving to positions they'd clearly studied in advance. They slid into prepared depressions, their movements smooth, tight. Muzzles flared. The first volleys came straight at the outpost, pinning any defenders who tried to rush the doors. Then the fire shifted, some weapons angling down toward the village. Stone chipped from building corners. A man standing in the open dropped, clutching at his shoulder. Nadia! Aaron grabbed her arm. Inside, she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes had already snapped up, tracing the pattern of impacts like red lines on the map only she could see. They're shaping a kill zone, she said, almost dazed. If we send anything up the road, it dies halfway. They've got the top and the side angles. Her gaze flicked to the saddle. And that's not even occupied yet. We'll worry about that in a minute, Aaron said tightly. Get in cover now. He turned, voice rising. All civilians to the church and the stone houses. Move. Guards, split your squads. Half on the village perimeter, half up toward the outpost. Use the back path, not the main road. His men scrambled to obey. It wasn't enough. There were never enough bodies when you had too many directions to defend. Explosions kicked new clouds of snow and dust into the air, turning parts of the slope into drifting curtains. Visibility shrank. Targets blurred, disappeared, reappeared. A young soldier heaved at the handle of a heavy machine gun near the edge of the square, trying to pivot it toward the ridge. The tripod snagged on a patch of ice. He hauled harder, teeth gritted. He was still exposed when a burst from above found him. He jerked, legs folding, and collapsed beside the weapon, blood immediately soaking into the snow. The machine gun sat, useless, a few degrees shy of being able to bear on the enemy. Medic, the nearest voice cried. Farouk bolted from the church step, med kit bouncing, boots slipping as he ran across the open ground. Stay down, Rafi shouted after him. Farouk, stay. Farouk dropped to his knees beside the wounded soldier, hands already pulling gauze and a tourniquet from the pack. Rounds broke around them, some hitting the stone of the church in hot sparks, others biting into the ground, sending dirty snow into the air. The enemy fire was not random. It walked methodically across the slope, bracketed the outpost, then crept down toward the path that linked base and village. They're cutting the road, Nadia said, more to herself than anyone, watching the pattern. Aaron grabbed her shoulders and turned her toward the church. Inside, he insisted, if we lose you today, this place, his voice broke for a second. They need you alive. I'm not the one they need right now, she said. He heard something in her tone that scared him more than the incoming fire. Nadia. He jerked his head toward the crush of villagers in the church doorway. Please. She let herself be pushed toward the entrance, boots crunching over scattered ice. Inside, the shadowed interior was a different world, crowded, loud, full of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, prayers and sobs blending with a muffled roar from outside. Children cried. An old woman clutched a thin wooden icon so tightly her knuckles were white. A boy in a sweater too thin for the season stared at Nadia's dress with wide eyes, as if the white cloth might somehow shield them all. She moved past them, deeper, toward the back where the walls grew cold and damp. Even here, her ears kept tracking the rhythm outside. Mortars again, a little off. Adjustment. Short bursts from the same gun at the same tempo. Someone shouting orders. Voice cracking through the chaos. She knew that pattern. She knew how long you could keep it up before the barrel warped. How quickly you could replace one weapon with another. Aaron appeared beside her again, breathing hard. Dust streaked his jacket. We push a squad up the back path, he said, thinking aloud. Keep them low along the boulders. Maybe they can get into the outpost from the side. Then, They'll get cut off halfway, she said quietly. They've got enfilade from the new breach. See the spray? She nodded toward the narrow window. Aaron followed her gaze. Through the small gap, they could see slashes in the snow where rounds had been driven in from an angle that meant one thing. A gun aimed placed specifically to cover the alternate path. He swore under his breath. They're not just hitting us, Nadia continued. They're funneling us. The village is pressure. The real push is the bunker. Why do you say that? He asked, though a part of him already knew. They're walking shells down onto the entrance, she said. Not enough to crack it, just enough to clear anyone defending it. And look there. She pointed higher beyond the outpost. Through the drifting smoke and blown snow, small groups of enemy fighters broke away from the main line. Instead of firing down, they moved laterally along the mountain, hugging the rock. Their path curved toward the base of the saddle. They're using the backside, she said, coming down behind the bunker while everyone's eyes are on the road and the main doors. Aaron exhaled a long, harsh sound. We don't have the men to cover that too. We don't. Another mortar landed closer to the church this time, showering the front wall in shards of stone. Inside, people screamed. Dust rained down from the ceiling beams. A child stumbled, hitting the floor. A young woman scooped the child up, pressing him to her chest, eyes wide with panic. Nadia felt something in her chest snap into alignment. I can't stay here, she said, almost surprised by the calm in her own voice. You can and you will, Aaron shot back. You're not. She turned to him fully, meeting his eyes. They're doing what you warned us about, she said. They're going for the systems, and they're going to use the civilians as leverage when they do. We don't know that. Yes, we do. He shook his head, jaw clenched. Even if that's true, it's not on you anymore. That's the whole point of today. The whole point of today, she said slowly, was that we'd stop pretending there's another unit coming to save us when things go bad. Another shell hit, closer still. The church trembled. Outside, someone shouted a target indicator. A rifle answered, its sharp cracks lost in the larger roar. Nadia reached up and pulled the veil from her hair. The delicate netting slid down, ghosting over her shoulders. She caught it before it hit the floor and folded it once, twice, fingers deliberate. Then she handed it to Aaron. His hand closed around it automatically, eyes never leaving her face. I promised myself I was done, she said. Not because I stopped being able to read mountains, but because last time I let someone else tell me what I was seeing wasn't real. This isn't. My spotter died for that, she said, voice flat. Because I listened when I should have moved. I won't do that again. He looked at her as if seeing, for the first time in months, the woman from the photo on the shelf, not the version he'd been hoping she could become. You step out that door, he said, and you might not come back. You step out that door without someone on that saddle, she replied, and neither do they. She nodded toward where the outpost lay, unseen but ever present. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Far away, on the ridge, another mortar round left its tube. Nadia took a breath. I'll be back, she said. It wasn't a promise in the way vows were. It was a target she aimed at. He reached for her, then stopped, fingers curling into a fist at his side instead. You better be, he whispered. She smiled, small and fierce. Keep the village breathing, she said. I'll take care of the ridge. Without waiting for permission, she turned and moved toward the back of the church, slipping through a side door that led to a narrow alley. The cold hit her full in the face. The noise did too, full volume now, unmuted by stone walls. Gunfire, shouted commands, the distant cough of mortars, the closer crack of rifle from the defenders who'd managed to get into position. She hitched up the skirt of her dress, revealing the boots and thermal pants beneath. The movements now clean, economical, all ceremony stripped away. The armory locker stood half open behind one of the storage buildings, its door thrown wide in the scramble. Inside, weapons remained racked, orderly lines of metal waiting for hands. Her eyes went straight to the long rifle in the back. It was older than most of the gear in the base, the finish worn to dull in the places countless fingers had gripped it. The scope had a scratch on the side from some long-ago fall. The sling smelled faintly of oil and old sweat. She lifted it out with the care of someone picking up an old friend they hadn't seen in years. Her hands remembered every part of it. Bolt back. Chamber check. Magazine seated. Safety on. Scope caps off. She shouldered it once, feeling the weight settle into the groove above her collarbone. It fit like it always had, no matter how much she pretended she'd grown out of it. Footsteps hit the packed snow behind her. "You're really doing this," Aaron said. Not a question. She didn't turn. "You knew it the second you saw me looking at that saddle." He came closer, stopping just out of reach. "Last time you froze because someone higher said your gut was wrong," he said quietly. "This time you might die because I tell you your gut is right." She smiled without humor. "You don't get to own this either way." He exhaled through his teeth. "There it is," he muttered. Then, louder, "Take the ravine. The go path. They haven't seen it yet, or they'd be hitting it." "I know," she said. "You'll be exposed as soon as you crest." "I know that too." He hesitated, then reached out and caught the edge of her shawl. For a moment, he simply held on, as if he could keep her there with the pressure alone. "Come back," he said. "I will if you don't get yourself killed down here," she shot back. Their eyes met, everything unsaid crammed into that brief connection. Then she pulled free. The ravine behind the village was nothing more than a scar in the mountainside, a cut where meltwater ran in the summer. In winter, it filled with shadow and ice. Nadia slipped into it, the sounds of the village fading a little as the walls closed around her. Wind whistled overhead, carrying the distant shriek of incoming rounds. She moved fast, but not reckless, boots finding purchase where the rock was rougher, hands reaching for holds. The rifle lay slung across her back, muzzle down, weight balanced. Behind her, another shell landed near the square, the concussion making loose snow slither down the ravine walls. It dusted her shoulders, cold against her neck. She climbed. The goat path wasn't so much a trail as a series of terrible decisions. It wound up behind the saddle, following jagged ledges and narrow dirt tongues that dropped off into nothing. In summer, only shepherds used it, and even they swore at it. In winter, it was almost suicidal. Loose snow and ice sheared away under her boots. Once her left foot punched through a crust, and she slid half a meter, knee banging hard against unseen rock. Pain flashed up her leg. She bit down on a curse, fingers digging into the stone until she stopped. She couldn't afford to fumble the rifle. She kept it sling tight against her chest, the metal at her back a constant, comforting drag. Halfway up, a shell landed somewhere above, showering the ravine with powdered snow. It came down in a sudden, hissing wave, a curtain that tried to sweep her off the narrow shelf she was on. She flattened against the rock, fingers numb with cold and strain, lungs burning. Snow poured past, cold fingers trying to pry her loose. She waited, counting her heartbeat. 5, 10, 15. The wave passed, leaving her clothes wet and heavy, the rock beneath her slippery. She moved again. Her breath fogged the inside of her scarf. When she shifted the rifle to check the scope, she realized some of that moisture had crept on a glass. She wiped it with her glove, squinting. A thin crack ran across the lens now, catching the light. "Of course," she muttered. She adjusted the magnification, tested the eye relief. The crack distorted the image at certain points, bending straight lines subtly. She moved her head, mapped where the distortion lay, then ran through the calculations in her head, factoring in distance, wind, angle, and now this new defect. She'd shot with worse. As she neared the saddle, voices floated down. Muffled, bled thin by the wind, but human. She froze, pressed flat behind a bulge of rock, listening. "Keep moving, the cave, below the bunker. Once we have the drive, bring the officer, camera ready." Their language wasn't hers, but she'd learned enough over the years to catch the important pieces. Cave, drive, officer, camera. Her jaw tightened. She waited until their footsteps faded, then eased herself up onto a narrow rock shelf that ran toward a protruding outcrop. From there, she could see down into parts of the ridge that had been invisible from the village. She saw the cave first, a dark mouth in the snow behind and above the bunker, smoke barely visible against the white. Cables snaked from its entrance to a compact array set in a shallow depression nearby, metal ribs bristling with small antennas. The jammer. Closer to the crest, she spotted the heavy machine gun, dug in, empty now, but still a threat if someone got back to it. A cluster of fighters huddled nearby, glancing nervously over their shoulders, clearly spooked by something they couldn't see. Farther along, she saw the valley. The small platoon below was pinned exactly the way she would have pinned them. Vehicles stuck, men scattered in sad, insufficient scrapes, fire walking toward them. She recognized their uniforms, their vehicles, the pattern of their movement. She also saw, more importantly, the positions that controlled their fate. She eased the rifle off her back and settled in a place on the shelf, using a rock as a forward support. Her hands shook for a moment, not from the cold. She let them. She didn't pull the trigger with shaking hands. Breath in. Hold. Breath out. The tremor faded. Through the cracked scope, the world narrowed to circles. She ranged without instruments, the distances already roughly stored in her memory from patrols and hilltop watches. That boulder is 300. The crest beyond it, 5. The valley floor, 450 from here, maybe a bit less with angle. She whispered the numbers to herself, not because she needed to, but because it put the right rhythm back in her head. Then she began to build the ladder. Counter-sniper, she murmured. Machine gun. Radio. Mortar eyes. Jammer. Leaders. One by one, in order. The first target was patience-made flesh. Tucked into a little hollow, almost invisible, the enemy sniper watched the valley, rifle resting across a sandbag, barrel barely visible. He was good. He hadn't fired much. He just waited, scope tracking, ready to pick off anyone who tried to break the pattern. If she went loud without taking him first, he'd find her within minutes. She settled the crosshairs on the small slice of him she could see and adjusted for the crack's distortion, the wind whipping along the saddle, the drop. Her finger found the trigger, a familiar home. She waited for the pause between his breaths, the tiny still point in his movement. Then she fired. The recoil punched in her shoulder, a comforting, solid kick. In the scope, the man jerked, then vanished, rolling out of sight. By the time his comrades realized he wasn't moving, the sound of her shot was already bouncing off distant slopes, disguised among the noise of their own guns. She shifted to the machine gun nest. From here, the weapon looked almost delicate, a thin barrel and a boxy receiver in a neat little bunker. She could see the assistant feeding the belt, gloved hands steady. The gunner's posture was textbook, cheek weld tight, stance anchored. She respected his work even as she prepared to end it. The first shot took the assistant through the side of the head. He dropped like the string had been cut. The gunner jerked back, startled, hand halfway to the weapon. The second shot hit him before that hand got there. The machine gun slumped, barrel sliding forward, useless. Down in the valley, the effect was immediate. The deadly, precise hammering that had been pinning the small platoon stopped. Men who had been frozen in place lifted their heads. They might not know why, but they knew an opening when it came. The platoon leader shouted something and waved his arm. Figures scrambled, dragging the wounded toward better cover, sprinting to higher ground along the right wall. Nadia didn't watch them long. She was already scanning for the radio. Radios had a posture. The person holding them always stood a little more upright. One shoulder canted toward the speaker, head turned, attention split between listening to instructions and the chaos around them. She found him tucked behind a chunk of blasted rock. Antenna curved above his head, handset pressed tight to his ear. Mouth moving fast. She exhaled, let the scope drift, then brought it back. Squeezed. The man snapped back as if slapped, receiver flying from his hand, the antenna wobbling. Shouts rose along the ridge. Men turned toward each other, gesturing wildly. For the first time, helplessness crept into the lines of their bodies. The invisible hand guiding them had just been severed. They didn't know where the blow had come from. They only knew that something on the mountain had turned against them. They tried to adapt. A squad leader pointed toward the saddle, shouting orders. A few fighters shifted their fire, rounds probing the rocks in the general direction of Nadia's perch. Chips of stone and fountains of snow erupted around her. She flattened, waited out the first wild search. A new sound joined the battlefield then, a high, insect-like whine that rose from behind the ridge and swung upward. She lifted her head, just enough to see it. The drone was small, barely larger than a dinner plate, rotors humming as it popped above the crest, camera pod swiveling. It scanned the slopes, mechanical, eye hunting for the anomaly that had just disrupted their perfect script. "Of course they brought a toy," she whispered. She hugged the rock, minimizing her profile. The drone buzzed overhead, pausing at intervals, camera likely using infrared as well as visual. Her heart thumped, loud in her ears. If they spotted her, those climbers she'd heard earlier would become a very immediate problem. The drone drifted, lingered for a few seconds too long near her shelf, then moved on, following the line of the mountain. She took the sliver of time it bought her and shifted her attention. The jammer array lay in that shallow depression behind the ridge, metal shining dully. Two men in heavier jackets moved around it, checking cables, watching meters on a small portable console. If she killed the device now, they'd instantly know where the shot had come from. The array's position made any attempt at a clean escape impossible. She couldn't take that shot yet. Instead, she swung to the mortar observation post. A figure with binoculars stood slightly above a pair of tubes, calling corrections down to the crew. He'd been walking rounds down toward the bunker and the village with frustrating precision. She watched him for a moment, following the way his free hand chopped through the air, fingers showing the adjustments. The next time he lifted his binoculars, she put a round through his chest. He folded, arms flaring, the binoculars flying away. The mortar crew below him froze, then looked at each other, unsure. Their next volley went long. The one after that scattered wildly, one shell harmlessly thumping into a drift far from any target. They were good. They were not good enough to keep their accuracy without their eyes. Down below, Aaron and Rafi were fighting their own battle. From their vantage points near the village, they could see that someone up high was stripping away the most dangerous teeth in the ambush, but they didn't know who or how long it would last. "Do you see it?" Rafi shouted over the fire, ducking behind the corner of a house as rounds chewed at the stone. "I don't see anything," Aaron yelled back, leaning out to put two controlled shots toward a muzzle flash on the ridge. "I just see opportunities. Take them." They pushed a squad up an alternate flank, using the sudden slackening of fire to move from cover to cover, aiming to get closer to the outpost. The men climbed, slipping on ice, panting in the thin air. Above them, Nadia kept working the ladder, her world reduced to targets and sequence. She started to pick off the small group leaders now, the ones with the body language of authority. The fighters around each of them faltered in turn, less sure, their fields of fire fraying. The enemy finally committed to a counterhunt. Two climbers appeared on the goat path below her, rifles slung across their backs, climbing harnesses cinched tight, grenades clipped to their vests. They moved cautiously, knowing the path was treacherous, eyes scanning for any sign that someone else had used it. One paused, fingers brushing the smooth scuff where her boot had slipped earlier. He frowned, gestured to his partner, then pointed upward. They picked up their pace. At the same time, the squad on the ridge that had roughly triangulated her muzzle flash began to pour blind fire into her section of the mountain. Bullets snapped past, some close enough that she could feel their wake, others punching into the rock and sending sharp stone into her face. Bits of granite stung her skin. A sliver sliced her cheek, hot against the cold. She gritted her teeth and pressed herself flatter, counting again. 1, 2, 3. She couldn't stay here forever. Her ammo load was already thin. She'd only been able to grab a handful of magazines from the armory in her rush. She could feel the weight of them in her vest, too light for comfort. She checked quickly. A few rounds left in the current mag. 3 full ones remaining. Not enough to drop every enemy on the ridge. Enough, if she chose carefully, to break their cohesion completely. Her gaze returned to the jammer. If she didn't take it out, the village and outpost remained cut off from fire support and higher command. Every choice they made would be blind. If she did take it out, she would light a flare over her own head. The climbers were close now. She could hear them grunting, boots sliding on the narrow path, the faint clink of metal. Turning point shot, she whispered to herself. Old instructor's phrases came back. One that changes the story. She inhaled through her nose, air burning in her lungs. Exhaled through her mouth. Then she rolled slightly, bringing the rifle to bear on the jammer array. The angle was bad. She could see only part of it. One of the vertical supports, a small section of the main box. One of the technicians bent over the console, head turned, profile exposed. Between the crack in the scope, the wind, the distance, and the target size, it was easily the hardest shot of the day. She settled, adjusted, ignored the sting of blood on her cheek. In the valley, Kareem's voice tore at his throat as he shouted a last-ditch order. In the village, Aaron's radio still hissed uselessly, dead weight in his hand. In the operations room, the radar operator stared at his blank screen. On the ridge, the climbers took another careful step upward, fingers reaching for the rock lip that would let them see over into Nadia's nest. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked out, threading a needle of air and distance. In the depression behind the ridge, the technician jerked as the bullet hit him in the temple. He dropped, knocking the console sideways. The impact smashed a key component into the body of the array. The jammer coughed once, emitted a brief spray of static into the ether, and died. At the same instant, one of the climber's hands appeared on the edge of her shelf, fingers curling, knuckles whitening as he hauled himself up. Nadia rolled, bringing the rifle with her. The man's head cleared the edge. His eyes widened at the sight of her, a woman in a tattered white dress and a shawl spattered with dust and blood, rifle already rising. He swore and lunged, other hand reaching for the grenade at his chest. She didn't have time for a clean sight picture. She fired from a hip, the shot slamming into his sternum. He jerked backward, gasping, grip loosening. The grenade pin he'd yanked free clinked onto the shelf between them. For one horrible moment, everything was movement and sound, his body falling, his partner shouting below, the grenade rolling, ticking away seconds. Nadia grabbed it, fingers fumbling on the cold metal, and hurled it off the shelf in the direction of the goat path. It went over the edge just as it detonated, a bright white flash and a boom that echoed up and down the ravine. Shrapnel sang past, one piece grazing her arm, hot and sharp. She hissed, clamping a hand over the cut for a second, then let it go. The drone above the ridge, already reeling from the sudden loss of signal from the jammer, jerked in midair. Disconnected from its controller, it faltered, spun, and crashed somewhere out of sight with a distant metallic crunch. Down in the valley, Kareem flinched as his radio shrieked, then, miraculously, cleared. Stone to one, this is Sunrise. A voice barked through the speaker, distorted but alive. We lost you for nearly 15 minutes. Report. Kareem stared at the handset, as if it had grown a new head. Sunrise, this is Stone to one. Troops in contact, he rasped. Ambush from the ridge. We are pinned, but moving. Jamming appears down. We need immediate fire on grid 3-5 kilo. Copy, Stone 2-1. Fire mission inbound. Mark your position if able. He almost laughed, the sound strangled in his throat. You bet we're able, he croaked, waving at Bashir. Pop smoke. Any color, just do it. In the village, Aaron's radio squealed and slammed back into his ear with a burst of overlapping voices. Repeat, all stations, jammer is down. He fumbled with the dial, heart racing. Sunrise, this is village base, he cut in. We are under coordinated attack. Mortar fire on outpost and village. Bunker is primary target. Enemy positions on the upper ridge, breach above the outpost. Friendlies moving to reinforce. Village base, Sunrise. We are reading you. Air asset rerouted from Sector 7. ETA 8 minutes. Hold what you can. Can you confirm jammer location? Aaron glanced up the slope, eyes tracking. He didn't see the jammer, didn't see its ruin. What he saw were the subtle shifts. Enemy fire faltering, men pointing at each other, confusion radiating like heat off the snow. He thought of the saddle. He thought of the figure he still couldn't see on it. Negative, he said, but someone just turned it off for you. Understood, the voice replied. We'll take the gift. Mark friendly positions. Stand by for fire missions. On the ridge, the fighters felt the change even before the first distant roar of incoming aircraft reached their ears. Orders from their higher command, already strained by the loss of their radio operator, now came in broken and conflicting. Some units were told to push. Others were told to pull back. A few heard nothing at all. They argued. They gestured. The cohesive, terrifying shape of their operation started to fray. Nadia saw it in their posture. She ejected the spent magazine, slapped in a fresh one. It was her second to last. She went back to the ladder, this time focusing on the men who still tried to rally their comrades. The ones pointing, shouting, hitting shoulders to get attention. She took them in order, each shot removing another node in the enemy's network. With every body that fell, the fighters around them grew more hesitant. Some fired wildly down the slope, others started backing away, step by careful step, instincts screaming that this mountain was suddenly no longer theirs. Below, Aaron's squad pushed farther up the flank, using better cover now that the fire slackened. They reached a low wall near the outpost and vaulted it with practiced ease. Inside the operations room, staff rallied, moving with renewed purpose now that their headsets buzzed with coherent words instead of white noise. Artillery will focus on the upper ridge, the supervisor snapped. Mark friendlies with green smoke only. Anything outside that gets turned into a memory. Men rushed to the windows with smoke grenades, popped the caps, and flung them, bright colors hissing as they bloomed on the snow. Far overhead, jets roared in, their engines a new kind of thunder. Nadia saw the contrails before she heard them. She used the last rounds in her magazine to drop a pair of fighters who were setting up a fresh gun, then paused. Her final magazine felt light in her gloved hand. She slid it into place anyway. Targets still existed. Some enemy fighters, realizing the tide was turning decisively against them, began to pull back toward the blasted breach, trying to retreat the way they'd come. Others, either more ideological or more desperate, threw themselves into frantic, last-ditch firing positions, trying to hold off the inevitable. She didn't bother with the ones already running. Gravity and air support would finish them. She looked instead for the ones whose resistance might still cost her people lives before the day was over. She dropped 2 more leaders and a gunner who'd found a new angle. Her rifle clicked on an empty chamber sooner than she'd have liked. She worked the bolt anyway out of habit. Nothing but the hollow clack of dry metal answered. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and rolled on her back for a second, staring up at the sky. Snowflakes drifted down, melting as they hit her warm face. The mountain roared and boomed around her as artillery finally joined the conversation. She'd taken the shot that mattered most, the one that gave everyone else their turn. Later in the stories, they would try to compress what she'd done into one neat phrase, the shot that stopped the mountain. The bride who fired once and broke an army. Only she and the ridge would know how many breaths, how many decisions, how many tiny corrections had gone into making that myth even remotely true. By the time they came for her, her fingers were almost too stiff to move. Aaron's shout reached her before his face did. Up here, Rafi's voice echoed. Watch your footing. Boots scrabbled on the path below. A helmeted head appeared at the edge of the shelf, then another. Hands reached up, firmly offering grips. Nadia pushed herself to sitting, the rifle lying across her lap, bolt open. Her dress was no longer white. It was a patchwork of dirt, soot, and dry blood. The shawl hung in ragged strips. She hooked the rifle's sling over her shoulder, then took the offered hands. They hauled her to her feet with a grunt. Rafi panted, cheeks flushed, eyes wide as he took in the scene. The spent casing scattered around her, the chipped rock, the faint smear of blood on her cheek. You picked a hell of a honeymoon spot, he said. Her laugh came out hoarse. You're late, she replied. Aaron climbed up last, one hand always on the rock, the other reaching for her as soon as he cleared the edge. He pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace, their gear clacking together, the rifle digging between them. I told you to come back, he said into her hair. And I did, she answered, leaning heavily against him for a second before straightening. Below them, the mountain was a study in aftermath. Smoke drifted from the upper ridge, where artillery had punched fresh scars into the snow and rock. Some fires still burned in shattered positions. Figures moved among the bodies, some with hands raised, others dragging wounded comrades. In the valley, the small platoon was regrouping, medics moving from man to man. Stretcher teams trudged along the road, boots leaving dark tracks in the white. In the village, people emerged cautiously from the church and houses, blinking in the pale light. Children clung to parents. Some wept. Others, resilient in the way only the very young could be, were already trying to gather fragments of shrapnel as trophies. At the outpost, smoke blackened but standing, the bunker doors remained closed, battered but intact. The cost was obvious in the number of bodies being carried toward the aid station. It could have been far worse. They made their way down slowly. The climb that had been near suicidal going up was worse, with limbs trembling and adrenaline fading, but there were more hands now, more voices, more ropes. By the time Nadia stepped back on a level ground, her legs felt like they were made of someone else's bones. Medics tried to pull her toward Tria. She shook them off until one particularly stubborn sergeant barred her path, eyes narrowing at the gash on her arm and the blood on her face. "Sit," he ordered, "or I sedate you, and you miss the whole debrief." She considered arguing, then allowed herself to sink onto a crate. The medic cleaned the cut on her cheek, the sting a small, sharp thing compared to the day's earlier pains. Inside the outpost, the makeshift debrief started almost at once. There was no time to wait for proper forms. Maps were spread across a table still dusted with plaster. Enemy gear piled in one corner. Rifles, detonators, a few body-worn cameras whose lens covers had been cracked by shrapnel. One of the intelligence officers scrolled through files on a capture tablet, brows furrowed. "Look at this," he said, angling the screen so Aaron and the commander could see. On it, grainy satellite imagery showed the outpost and village, zooming in on the bunker, the access road, the church. Overlaid lines marked positions that matched where the enemy had actually appeared. Another file contained a crude schedule, a list of patrol times, supply movements, and, chillingly, a notation for ceremony. Full attendance authorized. "They had our routines," the intelligence officer said, "down to the hour. Someone fed them everything." Aaron's stomach twisted. "Defector?" he asked. "Maybe," the officer said. "Or they intercepted traffic somewhere we assumed was secure." Either way, they knew the day, the time, the likely distribution of personnel. They planned this as a demonstration. He tapped another file. See? They had scripts prepared for videos. Phrases about corrupt officers, captured technology, humiliating the enemy on their holy day. The commander's face hardened. "They wanted the control systems," he said, "and the drives. And hostages," the officer added. "Officers and civilians both. You could do a lot with that on camera." They turned as the door opened and the platoon leader from the valley walked in, helmet under his arm, dust in every line of his face. He nodded respectfully to the commander, but his eyes searched for someone else. They found Nadia where she stood near the wall, arms folded, rifle slung. "You," he said, and there was raw gratitude in the single word. She shifted, uncomfortable. "Your men did most of the work," she said. "I just took some of the weight off." "Some," he echoed. He shook his head. "We were done. No comms, no support, no angles." Then someone reached in from behind the ridge and started cutting strings. First our death, then their cohesion. He walked up to her and stuck out his hand. "Lieutenant Karim," he said, "on behalf of my platoon, thank you." She took his hand, grip firm. "Nadia," she said simply. "One shot." A younger soldier who'd come in with Karim blurted. "They said you fired one shot and dropped their whole command." Karim snorted. "That's not how it works, and you know it," he told the soldier. To Nadia, he added, "But I suspect there will be a story like that by nightfall." Rafi, leaning against the doorframe, grinned. "Too late," he said. "They're already calling you the woman from the mountain." Nadia made a face. "That's awful." "Legends usually are, in the details," the commander said. "But sometimes they're useful." He looked at her, gaze steady. "You broke their back today," he said. And you did it when you weren't obliged to. You could have stayed in that church, and nobody would have blamed you. I would have, she said. He nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. There will be recommendations, he continued. Decorations. Citations. I can push your file up, recommend you return to full sniper duty. We could use you. A quiet settled over the room, different from the battle's aftermath. Everyone seemed to feel the weight of the choice being laid out. Nadia looked at the table, at the maps, the captured tablet, at the photo of the bunker on the screen, the little icon marking the jammer's grave. I'm not sure I belong back on a roster, she said finally. Not the way I was before. You proved today that. I proved today, she cut in gently, that when I read a mountain a certain way, I shouldn't let anyone talk me out of it. I proved that I still know how to pull the trigger when it counts. Her gaze flicked to Aaron, standing just behind the commander's shoulder. And I proved that I can't pretend that part of me isn't there. She took a breath. But I don't want my name on any poster. I don't want to become another story they use to tell girls up here that the only way to matter is to pick up a rifle. The commander studied her for a long moment. What do you want, then? He asked. She thought of the village, of the children's faces pressed against the church windows, of the old women who had blessed her dress that morning, of the photograph on her shelf, half-burned, half-preserved. I want this to be recorded accurately in the file, she said. Every piece, the jamming, the leak, the mistakes, and the saves. I want the lesson to be about listening to the people who understand the terrain, not about me as some miracle on a wedding day. She shrugged one shoulder. And if, in the official ledger, my role is marked as present and nothing more, I can live with that. Rafi let out a soft chuckle. She just asked you to classify heroism, he said to the commander. You gonna say no? The commander's mouth curled at one corner. We'll compromise, he said. The details will be classified. The record will reflect that an unnamed Overwatch element neutralized key force multipliers and enabled defense of vital assets. Everyone in this valley will know who that was. Anyone outside won't need to. That works, Nadia said. Kareem shook his head in disbelief. You really don't want the medal? I have enough weight around my neck, she replied, fingers brushing the ring on her hand. The commander nodded. Then, that's settled. Outside, the work of rebuilding began. Men with shovels cleared new debris from old paths. Broken windows were patched with plastic. The dead were carried to a quiet corner of the village, preparations for burial already underway, according to custom. The wedding didn't resume so much as reform into something different. There was no arch this time. It had been shattered by a near miss. The decorations hung in tatters. The music was softer, the notes carrying a different kind of ache. In the half-ruined church, Nadia and Aaron stood before the elder again. Her dress was torn, seemed straining where she'd climbed. There were smudges of soot on her cheek the medic hadn't completely cleaned. The rifle case rested just inside the door, a silent witness. Their vows were simpler this time, less about ceremonies and more about what they both now knew was true, that life up here would never really be far from the scope, no matter how much they might wish it. When the elder asked if they would stand together in times of peace and in times of danger, both of them answered with a conviction that came not from imagination, but from fresh memory. Outside, the snow had started to fall again, gentle flakes drifting down as if the mountain were trying to lay a clean sheet over the scars. After the final word was spoken, after the last blessing given, after the small, ragged cheer from the assembled villagers and soldiers, Nadia stepped out into that falling white. In one hand, she held a modest bouquet someone had managed to salvage, a few wildflowers wrapped with faded ribbon. In the other, she carried the rifle case, the strap worn but strong. The ring on her finger glinted as she shifted her grip. She paused at the edge of the square and looked up. The ridge loomed, fanged and inscrutable, scars from the day's battle already starting to blend back into the landscape. In a few storms' time, you'd barely be able to tell anything had happened there at all. But she would know. So would the men in the valley who'd felt a mountain turn in their favor. So would the villagers who had heard the single, impossible crack of a distant rifle and lived to tell stories about it. She squeezed Aaron's hand when he came to stand beside her. You thinking about earlier? He asked quietly. I'm thinking about later, she said. Later. The next time the ridge looks wrong, she answered. Because there will be a next time. Maybe not here. Maybe not with us. But somewhere like this, someone will look up and feel it. He nodded slowly. And I hope, she said, that whoever's standing next to them believes them when they say so. He was silent for a moment. That's your real vow, isn't it? He said at last. She smiled. I still on the mountains. Something like that. The narrator, if there had been one audible in that square, might have said that some people take off their uniforms and hang them in closets, pretending the fabric stays there. Others learn that certain parts of them don't come off with the jacket or the rifle sling. Some parts stay. The parts that red wind and snow like text. The parts that feel the mountain's intentions as surely as their own. Nadia knew, now more than ever, that she would never be the woman who left those parts behind. She would be the one who stood between her people and the ridge, ring on her finger, rifle within reach, whether anyone ever carve her name in a stone for it or not. Snow landed on her hair, melted, and disappeared. The mountain watched, indifferent as always. But somewhere on its broken crown, in a narrow, wind-scoured saddle, a faint impression marked the spot where a woman in a torn white dress had once lain behind a rifle and rewritten the shape of a battle with a single, deadly shot.